Good morning. Welcome to the Catholic Poetry Show. This is the first episode, possibly the last and only episode. We don't know. We'll see how it goes. We're going to be starting with Gerard Manley Hopkins. Why? Because he's one of my favorites, and if you're going to do Catholic poetry, you really can't omit him. He's kind of a big deal in terms of Catholic poetry. He was a 19th century Jesuit priest who was also a poet. And we'll talk about the biographical details as they come up. I'm not going to go through the entire biography of his life right now. We're going to start with one of his poems, Carrion Comfort. Why this particular poem? It occurred to me recently. It came back to me recently in connection with a patient and with patients that I see in clinic, and it always seems to me to express really, really well something that patients don't always see about themselves, and we'll explain that in a little bit. First, the poem. Carrion Comfort. I'll not carrion comfort despair, not feast on thee. Not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or, most weary, cry, I can no more. I can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be. But oh thou terrible, why wouldst thou root on me thy ring earth right foot rock? Lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, oh in turns of tempest, me heaped there, me frantic to avoid thee and flee. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer and clear. Nay, in all that toil, that coil, since, seems, I kissed the rod, hand rather, my heart low lapped strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. Cheer whom, though? The hero whose heaven-handling flung me, foot trod me, or me that fought him? Oh, which one? Is it each one? That night, that year, of now done darkness I wretch, lay wrestling with my God, my God. So this is a poem that Hopkins wrote about a period of deep depression that he went through. He was a very sensitive man. He was a very melancholy personality, felt things deeply, saw things deeply. He was also very committed to his vocation as a Jesuit priest. And there was a point in his life where he gave up poetry for a while. He intended to give it up forever because he felt that it was somewhat frivolous. It was not really what God was calling him to. God was calling him to be a priest, and he should focus on that, and he should not worry about his little scribblings in his notebooks. And he maintained this for quite some time until there was an event that made the news of the day. A steamer called the Deutschland went down off the coast of Britain, and with it were drowned many people, but among them 5 German nuns who had been exiled from their country. And suddenly he found he had no choice but to write poetry again. He had to write something about these 5 nuns, which the Wreck of the Deutschland is one of his best. We'll get to that at some point. It's quite a long poem. We'll get to that at some point. But at the end of this period of depression, he's writing a poem looking back at it, and that's Carrion Comfort. So he's gotten to a point where he can defy the darkness, he can defy the depression and say, I'll not carrion comfort, despair, not feast on thee. He's not going to feast, meaning he's sad, he's depressed, he's confused, he's perhaps angry, but he's not going to wallow in it. He's gotten to the point where he can stand outside of the darkness and look back at himself in the darkness. And that little bit of perspective, the ability to stand outside oneself and look at oneself suffering, just that tiny little bit of separation from the suffering it makes all the difference in the world in terms of in terms of outcome, in terms of how well we're going to deal with whatever trouble or trial this is not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me. Untwist the strands of man. He's addressing a temptation to self-destruction, essentially a temptation to suicide. He definitely he alludes to that several times in the poem. It's something that he is gotten to the point where he can name it. He can say, this is what you're trying to get me to do, and I will not do it. When we arrive at the point where we can name the darkness, we can say, this is depression, or this is anxiety, or this is despair that I am being tempted to, or this is despair that I have given into, but I choose not to give into it anymore. The ability to name the darkness as such is very important, because when I am naming it, I am saying that is that, and I am me. I am the namer, naming this thing, and this thing that is named is not me. It is something outside of me that is trying to influence me, trying to control me, trying to damage me, but it is not me. And at the end of this period of depression, Hopkins is finding words to put to this phenomenon of standing outside and naming something alien to him. Not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can no more. I can. This is straight out of my experience in the Army, is that you get to a point where you're just beaten down, you're tired, you're exhausted, you've been going for however long, you're dirty, you're hungry, you're cold, and there's that voice in you that's saying, I can't do this anymore. And I see it in clinic too, people who've been depressed for long periods of time, people who've been dealing with family situations, work situations, or just the general meaninglessness of modern life. They get to a point where they're like, I can't do this anymore. They'll say that. Hopkins is saying, I won't say that. I will not cry, I can no more. Why not? I can. It would be a lie to say I can no more. He is not going to live by that lie. He knows, in fact, the truth is he can do more. And this is something that I learned in the Army, is that when you get to that point where you feel like I can't do this anymore, well, that's usually not actually true. You can put that one foot in front of the other. You can lift that thing one more time. You can stay awake that other minute. Or you can do that thing. Maybe you can't envision doing this forever and ever and ever. And that too is a lie. The lie that this is never going to end. It will always be like this. Well, that is a lie. That's not the truth. The truth is, it doesn't matter whether this is ever going to end, or what matters is the choice right in front of me. I can do something. What can you do? Can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be? So he offers three possibilities, three things that he can do in order of descending difficulty but increasing importance. So hope. Hope is forward thinking. It's thinking past. So if we imagine ourselves like there's the ground and there's a hole in the ground, and we imagine ourselves at the bottom of the hole. We can't see over the edge of the hole to know what lies ahead. All we know is we're in the hole. Hope is the forward thinking. It's saying there's something outside the hole and I'm going to get there. There's something ahead. There's something good. That's hope. It's forward thinking. It's the strongest and the best of these three options. But let's say he can't do that. Well, wish day come. So at least not wallow in the darkness. At least not say, oh, I give up. I don't care. I don't even want to be happy anymore. I don't even want there to be sunlight. I'm good with the darkness. That's all there is. That's all there needs to be. That's all I deserve. Whatever lie it is that we're being fed, he's choosing not to repeat this lie. He is, in fact, saying, no, daylight is better than night, and I wish it would come. Because as long as he's wishing it would come, as long as he's missing the daylight, he is not yet overcome by the darkness. But let's say he doesn't even have the strength to do that. Let's say he can't even hope for the sun. At the very, very least, not choose not to be. It's like, at the very least, I can not kill myself. Now, this I think is kind of a bold statement for him, because he is writing in a world where the late Victorian period, the stiff upper lip period of British, the British culture of stiff upper lip, just keep going. We don't really, it's kind of a stereotype, but we don't really talk about our emotions. Now, the poetry of the period, don't get me wrong, the poetry of the period is incredibly emotionally rich. It's incredibly, it's kind of the romantic period of the poets. It's very, very concerned with feelings and giving voice perhaps to something that the culture is losing the words for. But Hopkins goes all the way to the very end of this. He says, if I keep going down this road, I'm going to end up killing myself. And I will not do that. That's the last section of this line, the last line of this stanza, not choose not to be. And at the very least, that is a victory. I've had patients where they've been dealing with depression for a very, very long time, and some of them dealing with suicidal thoughts for a very long time. And sometimes I'm able to reframe this, because they want to be, they want this to be over. They want this to be done. They want to be not struggling with this anymore. And that's good. I'm glad that they want that. But they get frustrated because they haven't been able to kick it yet, or to put it in words that I've heard from them. They haven't been able to overcome it yet. They're still just struggling with it. The victory that they're looking for is overcoming the depression, not having depression anymore. But the victory that, because they're so focused on that victory, they're not able to see necessarily the victory that they have achieved, which is that they're still alive. And every moment that somebody is struggling with that thought of ending their life and choosing not to do it, not choosing not to be, every moment that they do that is a new moment of victory. And sometimes just reframing the situation and allowing the person to see that victory for what it is can itself be a spur to that further victory, where they are able to get past the depression, or they're able to have a life outside or beyond the depression. Some people are never completely free of depression for many various reasons beyond the scope of this commentary on a poem. But realizing that they are having victory in the midst of the depression is a very powerful thing. And that is where Hopkins has gotten to this point. He's realizing that just because he has not chosen not to be, he has had victory through the middle of this whole year and more in which he was depressed. But oh thou terrible, and so now he's talking to God. He's calling God terrible. Why wouldst thou root on me thy ring earth right foot rock? I love the R alliteration there. Lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones. The alliteration is just awesome right there. He was very influenced by Welsh poetry and by Old Saxon poetry, where there's in the old ancient Saxon poetry, there's not rhyming per se. It's the use of alliteration, two to four words within a single line, all starting with the same letter. And he brings that to great effect into this modern poetry. Well, it was modern at the time. So he's asking God, why are you doing this to me? Why are you torturing me? And fan, oh, in turns of tempest, me heaped there. The fan, he's going to begin this metaphor of a fan, a wind blowing at him, a tempest that he's going through. Me heaped there. He's just kind of piled in a pile. He's just a heap of disconnected particles. He can't bring himself together. He can't form a solid whole. So the image of him as a heap, he morphs into me frantic to avoid thee and flee. Like, I want to get up and run away, but I'm just a heap on the ground. Now he's going to morph that into the image of a pile of grain. So that's the end of the second quatrain here. As he begins the sestet to finish out this, which is in fact a sonnet. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer and clear. So fanning in terms of tempest, me heaped there. So he has this image of himself as a heap, just a pile of disconnected particles. He's incapable of getting up and running away. And he morphs this into the image of him as grain. When they would take grain, they would harvest it, they would thresh it out, and they have a big pile of grain. And then somebody would winnow with a winnowing fan, and they would create a breeze, and people would toss the grain up into the air, and the chaff particles would fly away, and the heavier grain particles would settle to the ground. This image is used in the Bible in several times. I think in Micah, where it talks, and one of the Gospels, John the Baptist, his winnowing, talks about the winnowing fan. I think the prophet Micah does as well. I'll have to look that up. But the image is that God is going to separate the wheat from the chaff. He's going to get rid of all this garbage, essentially, this useless garbage, and he's going to keep just the grain, just the good stuff. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer and clear. And all that toil, that coil, since, seems, I kissed the rod, hand rather, my heart low lapped strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. So he's looking back on this period where he was being purified by darkness, purified by what John of the Cross might call the dark night of the senses. He is looking back on it, and he's saying that since I kissed the rod being the instrument of punishment, so it's something that you would use to strike somebody, or strike a servant, or strike a beast, a donkey, or something like that. Since I kissed the rod, hand rather. So it's not that God is whacking him with a stick, it's that God is touching him with his hand, and this touch is itself a discipline. And he kisses that. There's a moment when he kisses the rod, or kisses the hand that is disciplining him. That is, he embraces the cross. He stops fighting against it, stops trying to escape because he can't escape. Remember, he was desperate, frantic to avoid thee and flee, but he couldn't. And now, since he can't escape, I may as well just embrace it. I may as well just hug the cross to me and make the most of it. Or as we would say in the army, embrace the suck. Since that, my heart low lapped strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. In the embracing of the cross, he finds the strength and even a certain joy, and he laughs and he cheers. Perhaps an image of himself walking through the tempest. So he used in terms of tempest, he used that a couple lines earlier, the image of a tempest or a storm, and maybe he's walking through the storm and the wind is buffeting him and the rain is striking him in the face and maybe hail is hitting him, and as long as he's wrapped up in his coat and got his hat pulled low and he's trying to avoid this nasty weather, he's having a miserable time. But at some point he flips the switch. He's able to say, all right, I'm going to get wet. I'm going to get windblown. I'm going to get cold. We're just going to embrace it. And throws open his jacket, throws off his hat, lets the wind hit him, lets the rain hit him, and experiences the exaltation, this exhilaration from the very things that were so burdensome to him. His attitude has changed, and now he's able to draw strength and joy specifically from those very things. And that might be something that he is talking about here. So as he begins the second half of the sestet, would cheer whom though? So now he's changed the image, using the same word, but changing the image. He's cheering like somebody cheering on a wrestling match or a boxing match or something like that. Wrestling match is going to turn out to be the correct analogy. Cheer whom though? Who am I cheering for? The hero whose heaven-handling flung me foot trod? So is he cheering for the person who's beating him up? Or me that fought him? And here we have a hearkening back to the book of Genesis, right? So Jacob, fleeing from his brother, and he goes to his uncle Laban. He works for him. He gets really rich. He's coming back. He's going to meet Laban's cheating him, so he's coming back. He's going to go meet his brother Esau, and he sends everybody across the river, and he himself goes to rest on the spot where he had an encounter with God earlier. And a man comes and wrestles with him all night long. And he says, he wrestles with him and he refuses to let go until the man says, well, let me go. Daytime's coming. Well, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. So he blesses him. And he says, your name now is Israel, because that Israel means one who strives with God. Your name is Israel because you have striven with gods and men and have prevailed. Now, it's obvious from the context of Genesis that he didn't actually win, because the angel or God, whichever way you look at it, doesn't really matter, touched him in the hollow of his thigh and wrenched his thigh out of socket. Like anybody who can just touch you and wrench a hip joint out of socket, like clearly that dude's not been fighting you with all his strength up until now. He's letting you in. It's like dad wrestling with a little kid. At some point, dad's just going to pick you up and hold you upside down by your ankle and be like, okay, big guy, good fight. We're done now. But Hopkins is bringing back is bringing the poem to this image where, who am I cheering for? Am I cheering for God who is beating me up, or am I cheering for myself fighting with him? Which one is it? Is it each one? That night, that year, remember John of the Cross, the dark night of the senses. I don't think Hopkins would consider this the dark night of the soul, but I could be wrong there. That night, that year of now done darkness. So he's saying he went through a night, a period of night that was very, very long. So he uses that year. Now, maybe it was an exact calendar year. Maybe he just is using year to mean that it was a very long time. It stretched out forever. It seemed like a year. Of now done darkness. Now done, meaning he's coming to the end of it, and he realizes that he's at the end of it. I, wretch, lay wrestling with my God. And the first my God is in parentheses, because he's just with an exclamation point. He's realizing that, my God, I have been wrestling with you. And it's not my God in the sense of taking the Lord's name in vain, using it as an expletive. He's talking to God. This whole poem is him talking to God. Even from the second quatrain. The first quatrain, he's talking to the darkness. He's talking to despair specifically. The second quatrain, he's talking to somebody terrible. We don't know who that is. Somebody who is beating him, somebody who is overcoming him. It could be that he's still talking to despair because he feels like despair has been beating him up this whole time. But why, frantic to avoid thee and flee, why? That my chaff might fly. So he's recognizing that the purpose of this has been purification. And as he does so, he gradually comes to the recognition, which is explicit in the very last line, the last four words of the last line. The year of now done darkness, I, wretch, lay wrestling with my God. My God. There's the surprise. So this is truly a beautiful moment in the poem. There's the surprise. This darkness that I've been wrestling with, I haven't been wrestling with just despair, just this disembodied evil over here, or even the evil one, even a devil. I've been wrestling with God. And the darkness is the darkness of God. The darkness of someone who can't stand the light of God. But when he says, my God, there's also an allusion to, I don't remember which gospel, where Thomas, unless I put my hand into his side and touch the marks of the nail, I will not believe. Jesus said, go ahead, put your hands into my side, touch the nails, do not be unbelieving, but believe. And Thomas says, my Lord and my God. The recognition and the faith that comes with that recognition, but the faith also, incipient faith, also enables the recognition. And here is Hopkins going through a similar thing. As he reaches this point, his faith bursts into flame, and that flame lightens the darkness around him so that he can see who it is he's been fighting all this time, and it's God. So when he thought he was most alone, when he thought he was most abandoned and most rejected, he was, in fact, the closest to God. He was, in fact, locked in this wrestling match with God for this entire time. And perhaps we can wonder why it is that we need to wrestle with God. Why it is that he chooses suffering, and why it is that he chooses darkness as ways of bringing us closer to him. And I think there's a lot of answers to that, and it's probably don't have time to get into all that. It's just enough to know that he does, and that he is. And that the very worst thing we could possibly do is choose not to wrestle with him. Like perhaps we would prefer to perhaps we would prefer to have a tea party with God, and we could sit across the table from him at a friendly distance and discuss this like polite folks, like civilized folks over a cup of tea. But that's not the kind of relationship that God wants from us. He wants a more intimate relationship. He wants a relationship of blood and guts and sweat, and the whole of us engaged with as much of him as we possibly can, because of course we can't engage the whole of him. He's infinite. But he wants us engaged with as much of him as our limited capacity could possibly stand. And we, frankly, don't want to do that. We want to hold him at that polite distance. So sometimes the way that he breaks through our politeness, to continue with that metaphor, is by yanking us out of our seat and tossing us around. Kind of like a dad might break his son out of a fit of the sulks by picking him up and throwing him in the air. Well, as long as the kid doesn't want to be picked up and thrown in the air, it's going to be a wrestling match and he's going to lose because dad's just bigger. But if he can let go of his sulkiness for a little bit and just kind of go along with it, he's going to end up having more fun. And he's going to end up closer to his dad than he otherwise would be because of that brief wrestling match. Now, God, I'm not saying that is exactly what God is doing every time somebody goes through depression. I'm saying that that's one way of looking at some forms of depression, some forms of darkness. And it is in any sense related to the metaphor in any way, the related to the metaphor that Hopkins is using here, that of wrestling with God. So that is the poem Carrion Comfort, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't blather on too ramblingly, probably ramblingly. And if I do another one, we'll see you next time.